much, Sheila. I'm so excited about this event. I've actually wanted to speak to Nicole and John Patrick for ages. So yeah, Nicole Flattery is the author of Show Them a Good Time, which is a short story collection that was published by The Stinging Fly. And she's been published in the Irish Times, Dublin Review, The White Review, and then Stinging Fly magazine. And she's also a recipient of the Next Generation Award. And John Patrick McHugh has published this short story collection, Pure Gold, which is published by New Island here in Ireland. And he has been published by Banshee, Granta, Winter Papers, and Stinging Fly. So I'm thrilled to have both of them here, and I hope you'll put your hands together, give them a round of applause. So the first question I wanted to ask both of you is about the short story form, because you both publish short story collections, and I believe you're both working on novels, and I think it's a really interesting space to be in between kind of already having published one collection of stories but then working on something that's a longer form. So would you be able to talk about kind of the difference, I suppose, between working on a shorter piece versus a longer piece and how you plan that in your head?
Do you want to go?
Please do.
Well, unlike Nicole, I'm very much at the beginnings of writing a novel, so I probably can't give too much of a coherent answer to that beyond my own inklings. They're very different in the sense, I think, well, for me personally, the one thing I've kind of noticed is like the intensity of the language. You can't really sustain what you can sustain in a short story over a novel. It just tire the reader out, it'll tire yourself out, I think. So that's one thing I've kind of really noted. And when it came to short stories, I was never, you know, when I started writing, I never thought, oh, I'll be a short story writer. It was just kind of more natural, like my characters did this and then they stopped, you know? So I suppose that'll be another change. But it's funny, when I think about short stories, for most short stories are maybe 2,000 to 3,000 words long. Yeah. That'd be by and large what are published in competitions and literary magazines. But all kind of my last 4 or 5 stories I've written are all like 12,000 words long, you know, like these insane amounts. So I kind of feel like maybe my writing is naturally kind of going to a longer length. And I think partly that is because, as I said, I'm less interested in language. Obviously I still like to play around with it, but I'm more interested in characters and what characters are doing and allowing a character to decide where a story is going to go. And I think maybe that's the difference that I'll probably find the most when it comes to a novel. Whereas when I look at my short stories, there's 4 or 5 where I know that I was allowing language to decide where the story is going to go. But with a novel, I don't think you can get away with that. You kind of have to like think about a big picture thing rather than just an intense feeling of 10, 15 minutes. So that's what I'm feeling so far.
Yeah, I agree with you, Jamie, definitely. One thing, because I've written a novel, and that was hard. But I did find the difficult thing that I really struggled with was, I think there's a certain amount of mystery in the short story, or it allows for a certain, you don't have to tell everything. It's almost there for the reader to figure out, and that can certainly be sustained across, like JP said, like 5,000 to 6,000 words. It really can't be sustained across a novel, which I have found out the hard way. So that's one thing. And yeah, like JP was saying, the language, there's just certain more things to consider. Like when I started my novel, I started typing it into this kind of big Word document, and I was intimidated by that, the size of the document. And then I broke it down into shorter chapters. I wrote a chapter by then, just because the project seems too big to do. So yeah, that was I don't know, something about starting a short story. I kind of started it with more a sense of adventure and fun. This makes me sound like I was dreading writing the novel. That's only partly true. But I didn't really, there was a freedom to writing the short stories that if you mess it up, it's only 3,000 words. You've only made a little bit of a mistake. If you mess up a novel, well, that was 2 or 3 years, you know? Anyway, that's everything.
Yes, indeed. And have you guys found, though, that in writing all of the short stories that you've both written, that you've written characters who just won't leave your mind? Then have there been any characters that just come back repeatedly in different forms in different stories?
Yeah, there's a character called John. He comes up now and again, which is which is a bit annoying. But yeah, I suppose again that kind of comes. I think I think when you write more and more stories, like you get more and more interested in characters. At least that's what I'm finding, and you get less interested, as I said, like that language. And then when you start thinking about characters, you do naturally kind of see them beyond. I used to always think a story used to end with like a little click, and then that was it done. And a reader can think a bit more, but for me, it's done. Now that click isn't really coming, and I think it's a fun and an exciting thing. So I get to follow these characters, but I think that just comes from writing more and more stories. And like I love short stories. It's probably like a little limited form because it is a short thing.
Yeah.
But I think maybe going kind of pushing past that limitations with characters and seeing where they're going. Elizabeth McCracken actually released a new collection where it's like follows a married couple through like 6 or 7 stories, and I think that's really interesting and really exciting. So yeah, it's kind of coming more and more in my mind, and like it's a bit of a joke, that John thing, but it's also true. I am imagining this John in different scenarios. Yeah, unhealthy and whatnot, but yeah, fun.
Good fodder, though.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do find that with like this collection, I wrote a lot of like kind of dissatisfied young women, as I was told frequently. So that was the one character I was kind of attracted to, like over and over again. But then even for preparing for this event and preparing for getting back out into the world as we have been, I was reading over the collection, and it's quite funny because I feel like quite a bit of distance from it now, and I really feel like that was a book I wrote in my 20s, and I do think that the novel is different and has like a different voice, even though it's only been about a 4 or 5 year difference. So I do feel part of me has like left it behind, like just slightly. But I think a lot about characters in other stories, like quite a lot. Like I think about like the boys and JP stories a lot, because
Yeah.
I can't write men very well. So I admire other people that can.
I think what struck me about both of your works is how integral the setting and the tone is. Like I really hear the Irish cadences in each of your work, and that really stood out to me, because I think that's something that can sometimes be dulled down somewhat, or like the edge can be like sawed off it and it's really intact. And I wondered how important that is, and if it is something that is prevalent in your mind when you're writing, that you want to keep an Irish cadence to it, or that a sense of place is important.
Yeah, place is so important. Like all my stories are on a fictional island, so by
Exactly.
definition, I do believe in place. But yeah, no, it's funny. It's something, again, more and more. I suppose when I first started writing, I was kind of almost wary of like being too Irish. I thought that was like a bad thing, and I was like, I want to be cool, New Yorker kind of vibe. Now I realize, yeah, I know I'm dressed all in black here, so it's really, it's not a good look. But yeah, when I started writing more and more and kind of wrote from what I'm interested in, wrote like myself, the only way I can, not kind of imitating these people that I admired. It's funny, the one thing I'm really, really keen on developing and playing with is just how my mother and her sisters talk, and the commas that I hear in their little conversations and how they phrase things. I think that is like the most exciting thing for me when I write now. Like that's all I want to follow, and I wouldn't have done that maybe 5-6 years ago. I would have been almost like haughty over it, thinking like, no, that's not writing. Why isn't it? Yeah, so it's something I'm very aware of and keen to, and I do want to. I'm always wary of making it, Irish, where like people are, dancing on tables and chippers. Like, that doesn't happen.
It does sometimes, JP.
I don't. I'm going to the wrong chippers. So like, my chippers are just grim. But like, retain like a sense of Irishness, but also not take advantage of it, which I think does happen in fiction, where you see writers almost like seriously pull the piss like out of what Ireland is. And I want to do that, but on the terms, like with the person getting pulled the piss out of. That's my one.
Setting the terms, that makes sense. Yeah.
No, I think this is like quite an Irish book in some senses, but just this week actually I was talking to Mike McCormick, and he was saying a really great writer, and his first collection came out like 20 years ago or something, and then he was saying that when he was first published, there was only UK presses. You didn't get to work with an Irish press, so there was no Tram Press, there was no Stinging Flat. So I think the really brilliant thing is Irish writers get to work with Irish editors a lot of the time, so you don't have to be like oh, I need to explain this word, or I need to explain what this is. So that's how a lot of great Irish writing sounds so much like itself, I think.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, because I know when I've spoken to other editors based in London, and sometimes when we read stuff from Irish writers and they're like, yeah, but maybe I didn't really understand this, would we not change this? And I spend the majority of my time saying no, like that. I feel like that's the most integral part of the story, is that voice that is kept and that isn't sort of simplified in a way, but because by virtue of doing that, you actually take away so much of what is unique about it, and then it's just a generic kind of basic plot story, which isn't what really any of us want to read. But I'd wonder if each of you would mind giving a little reading for us, and then we could talk a bit more after that.
Yeah, no problem.
Would you like to start?
I'm going to read from the last story, which is called A Short Story, and you get to meet John. So this is A Short Story. He was the last to emerge from the changing room, a conscious choice, and he was presently deciding, stood as he was at the end of the tiled hallway between the communal showers and swimming pool, how best to disguise his horrific body. His belly, his saggy sandcastle tits. A trick he often used was to adjust his swimming cap as he marched towards the water, fingers tentatively plucking the cherry-coloured latex about his forehead. Or another ruse was to fiddle with the off-white strings on his togs, knotting and then unknotting like it was a right doozy of a puzzle. But considering today, this meeting taped together by unseen texts and unverifiable facts, and by the understanding that he would get the shift at some stage, John figured he should garner that first easing laugh from them, from her, by racing, leaping, and bombing into the pool. A gigantic splash, and there'd be hoots and cries at this, rather than at the doughy spectacle of his body and the lumps which unfolded from it like sacks hooked to an air balloon carriage. And John could happily snicker along too, because he himself had determined to be the joke. He was 12, almost 13, basically 13. John peered out at a large hall decorated by grey statues of topless women holding pots which unloaded streams of water. There was a single deck chair for a lifeguard who was not on duty. Fake plastic ivy haired itself around 4 columns and encircled the steaming but vacant jacuzzi. Bang in the middle of the pool was Studsy and the 2 girls, Karen and Neve, a pale ribbon of disturbance. With his middle finger, John picked at the grout vein between the turquoise tiles on the wall. Heady pool smells, wet coins, disinfectant, spoon-fed medicine. Through the far four-length glass, the sky was blue and the sun was bright. They hadn't seen John yet, and he didn't want to stare.
That was great. I love hearing live readings now. I'm going to read from the first story in the book called Show Them a Good Time. And it's about a girl coming back to her hometown from New York. Before the garage, my hometown was famous amongst people with car sickness. It was here they stood retching and spewing before moving on somewhere better. When I came back from the city, I thought we both might have changed in bright and glamorous ways, but we hadn't. We were both long acquainted with disappointment and the joys of being used. I'd been home 2 months and the house felt strangely empty to me, as if all our furniture had been sold. Somehow 100 tiny, unspeakable events had happened in my absence. I was reunited with my mother, 2 flirts, 2 women who might find themselves in abusive relationships and not even notice, 2 true suckers back together. Every dinner time she questioned why I ate the way I did, why I stuck my fingers in so many jars and rooted around. Did I eat vegetables at all? Did they serve peas in many restaurants in that city? I said I didn't know. It wasn't something I thought much about. And she pointed her fork at me, that absurd vegetable speared on it, as if we shared a private joke. Were there boys there? Did you have a boyfriend? I did. Was he nice? Not really. He was irritating, you know. He said things like, I will have a small espresso, stuff about coffee that people already just know. He wasn't funny at all, and he kind of hit me, sometimes, in my sleep, though I suppose I was just pretending to be asleep, so it wasn't totally honest of me either. It's important for a man to have a sense of humour, a confiding, motherly smile. Her optimism was of the terrifying, impenetrable variety. It could burn through entire periods of history. My parents had a fierce bond I admired. They had refined the habits of the long married, saying nothing and then saying everything twice. They disregarded me, but in a practical way, the way you might ignore the weakling in a bomb shelter. Their days had their own sedate, private rhythm, punctuated by the sharp slam of the dishwasher. There was a strange daily pattern. Amble down the street, go to the supermarket, wave at a slight acquaintance, glance at the same patch of sky, come back home. They had seen boredom, stared it straight down, and survived. And still they were less strange, less aged than I was. My father, who had always worn black, suddenly had the energy and enthusiasm for colours, and sported a pink shirt under a red golf jumper. My mother encouraged me to support his developing style. They had new friends, couples they had allegedly met in the supermarket. When these people called on the telephone and I answered and said, "Who's this?" And they said, "No, who's this?" Like they might have stumbled across a burglary scene, a dramatic horror show that would strengthen their ties to my parents.
Thank you both. I thought it was good to give a flavour of your reading to the audience, because I wanted to ask you both about tone, which is something I was thinking a lot about as I was rereading both of your collections, and how it can shift, and also first person versus second person stuff. But I wondered if the tone that you employed, because they were all short stories and many of them were written for different publications in both circumstances, did you feel when you were compiling the collections that there was a same kind of thread of tone that ran through them, or did you feel like it was quite fractious?
I felt like there was maybe, I could almost split that collection in half, I think, and then there'd be a consistent tone between like 4 stories and 4 stories, with the tones just a little bit different. Like I do see it as a coherent collection. I do think I pick at things in the first story that I'm still picking at by the end, and I'm still interested in. But yeah, tone, I think, my writing, it definitely changed over the years. It just went from, as I said earlier, like going from full language to something maybe a bit bigger and broader. But it was something I was very aware of, and I like writing a collection and kind of putting it together. It's like you want to kind of keep that balance, and I wanted to make sure that it wasn't those 4 stories first, you know what I mean? That they would have a nice little variations. But it's such an important thing for a short story, and I often find I won't know where a story's going, but I can feel like a weight in a sentence, and that weight of a sentence will carry me on to a next sentence and a next sentence. And again, when you look at a novel, you can't do that, So I suppose tone is so key for a short story, and it has to be like that straight away, and it has to have the right thing. But when I look at that collection now, there's 4 stories where I can almost hear myself at a certain pitch, and then 4 where I'm a little bit deeper, higher, maybe, whatever. But
Yeah, I think that it's quite like a similar tone across all these things, but I think what I like about tone in a short story is that you can kind of trick the reader for like a few paragraphs. You can be like, oh, this narrator is normal, like they're all right, and then like by the 3rd paragraph you're like, no, I'm in the head, or I'm going on a journey with someone that is like not fully with us, or like not thinking clearly. So like I think that's that's what I've really noticed in the difference between the novel and the short story, that is something that you almost cannot do in a novel. Like you could maybe pull it off like across like 150 pages or something, but it's much harder to get that kind of like eccentric, disjointed voice.
Yeah, I think that's really true. That also struck me when I read Hump. I remember I was like, oh great, reading along, and then kind of like second page I'm like, gosh, okay, who am I reading along with here? And that's a really good point, because I do think that you're more open to reading, well, personally I find that I'm more open to reading about narrators who I don't trust or don't like, if it's in a short story form. But if I'm really settling in a story, I'm not sure that I want to share such headspace with them for such a long amount of time, which is maybe a good thing, because then you can write about characters who wouldn't necessarily sit at a table in a novel, but who could in a short story, and then by virtue of that you have a collection of these eccentric characters you couldn't spend a long time with, but you can spend kind of snippets of time with, which is quite interesting. And there was a question I had for you, Nicole, specifically about kind of your collection. I feel like a lot of the characters are arguing against capitalism and where it's putting them, what it's forcing them to do for jobs and stuff. And I wondered if you could talk a little bit about that and about dissatisfied not dissatisfied women, but just dissatisfied characters.
Oh, they were very dissatisfied. I think that's funny because like when I started writing this, I was like 20, and I didn't know it was going to be a collection of short stories when I had my first story published in A Stinging Fly. I was like 25, and I didn't even really, like, this makes me sound like not clued in or whatever, but I was not thinking of capitalism as a concept. I was just thinking of, like, I don't know how difficult everything was and how I was finding it personally difficult, and constantly coming up against the same things, which like we're all coming up against like all the time. And I didn't really feel it until maybe I finished this particular story, the one I read from, the one set in the petrol station, where I was like, okay, this does, like, work right now, like, seems like my kind of theme. And then it did kind of become, you know, like the sacrifices we make for work, the way we kind of change ourselves for work, the way we kind of make ourselves more presentable, like, you know, the way it's kind of bled into our personalities and like making a brand or whatever, like, which I feel is like a part of our generation, you know. So yeah, I think that only really became clear to me after I wrote that story, and it did influence kind of the other stories. And when I was putting the collection together, I was like, this could be considered my theme if I thought that way. Yeah. But I'm still, like, the novel is about work as well. So like, I'm still writing about work. I haven't figured it out. I don't think I'll ever figure work out. I'm fine to admit that.
That's all right. I mean, I don't think I will either. But then in terms of saying that you're both writers, that is the work that you do, how does that jar with, I guess, maybe societal expectations of like what a normal job should be? Like, do you ever get that when people ask you, what do you do? And if you say, I'm a writer, and then their response to that, like, do you feel a sense of defiance when you're saying that, or how do you feel?
Yeah, I wouldn't. I don't proclaim myself a hero just because I write. Yeah, fighting against a man by being a short story writer.
You definitely are.
Definitely.
No, I wouldn't. No, not at all. I think of it just like any other job. I tried to hit the same hours I'd hit if I was working 9 to 5. I think if you look at any other way, you know, you need to get over yourself a little bit. Like I'm serious about what I write. I'm serious about what I think, but I wouldn't take myself that seriously, you know. And that's perfect. I don't really want my work's my work. I'm separate from that, and I hope everyone can feel that way about their jobs, you know, because that's like one of the most depressing thing is people bringing home their work, and that's their whole lives, you know. So no, I don't feel defined when I say I'm a writer, you know. I don't really tell people I'm a writer. I keep the head down, really. But yeah, look, it's funny when, like, you know, thinking about writing as a job, it's such a precarious and difficult thing, you know. You don't get much money. It takes you so, like, unfeasible amount of time, long time to write a story, you know, a short story that may or may not get published, never mind being a book, you know. So it's like, it's a ridiculous notion, but yeah, please God, I can keep doing it for a long time. But yeah, no, I wouldn't be defined when I would say a writer. I think that's like a weird way of looking at it, but like, I'm very proud to be a writer, but I always think of writing as like a craft, a job in and of itself, you know. You still have to hit the hours and produce.
Which is a very healthy outlook, I think, and that's kind of a theme of today, because Owen earlier and then Claire, they were both talking about how it's kind of just about turning up, and the ideas come because you've trained yourself to always turn up. So then when they come, you're there. When they don't, you're still there and you're still working away. And Claire was talking about how sometimes writing feels like digging at hard soil, which I thought was such a good analogy. It's sort of like nothing's coming sometimes because of frost, but you're still trying, and that discipline, I guess, of writing on a daily basis or a weekly basis is so helpful. And do you guys approach writing that way as well? Is it quite like a disciplined act? If you're putting in the hours, like, as in like a normal job, it sounds like it is. But.
Yeah, that's the only way I can write. And, like, you know, I don't want to sound like I'm Mega Man doing, like, writing, you know, 10,000 words a day. Some days I don't write anything, but I still get to the desk and I still think, and I still follow, like, these thoughts. And, like, I'm in a very privileged position now where I'm able to do that. But look, there'll be a time in the future maybe where I will have to work, but hopefully I'll still be able to write in the morning or something like that, or after work, you know. But yeah, no, I do think it is. You have to have a discipline. You really have to work hard. It's a difficult thing because there will be days where it just doesn't work, but you still have to kind of get there at the very least. And, look, you know, and then it might come when you don't expect it. Then an idea or a line or whatnot.
Yeah,
I'm laughing because it's like the second time this week I've answered this question. I give such a reasonable, calm answer about, like, working, and I'm like imagining my boyfriend listening to me talking like this when I have been insane. I really was during lockdown, trying to finish my novel. But like, I'm like JP, I just try and like get to the desk and like, even if it's a case of like rewriting the same paragraph that you wrote the day before. But like the thing was with the novel, I was coming up against encountering problems that I never encountered writing this. So like that was kind of new to me, you know. So like it wasn't a case of like just revising the language and trying to make that like as strong as possible, but it was a case of like looking at characters, looking at different things every single day. Yeah. So like, yeah, that was like, yeah.
I think I remember listening to a podcast. It was an interview with you, and you were talking about your novel, saying that it was about Andy Warhol. Is that right?
Yeah, no, it is. It's true, and it's funny because you were asking about like, do our friends like know, and do we talk about writing and feel proud to be a writer? But I've been working on this Andy Warhol novel for 3 or 4 years, and a friend of mine came to visit me. She was like looking around. She was like, "You really like Andy Warhol? You never told me you like him so much." I was like, "I do have a few of his things, yeah." Yeah, so I've been doing that. I'm finished now. It's not necessarily about him, but it's set in that kind of world. So it's not set in Ireland. It's set in New York in the 1960s.
Cool.
Yeah,
sounds very exciting.
Yeah, we'll see. Yeah,
I'm sure it will be. In terms of writing inspiration, are there any writers in particular that you guys turn to when you're stuck or when you're looking for how to craft a good sentence? Really,
Crack open, show them a good time.
Yeah. I only read.
That was the right answer.
The only book I've read.
There's so many. I do I read before writing every day, and you know, I take so much from everyone. There's so many good writers, so many good books. I suppose Donald Antrim is a writer I love, and maybe that's one that maybe not many people have read or heard of. He's like American writer, very, very funny. But like, I suppose even just looking at Irish, like it's very hard not to be inspired by the contemporaries, like Nicole, Sally, Colin Barrett, Kevin, Claire Louise Bennett. These like, Ireland has such rich writers, and they're all doing different things, but all very interesting in their own way, and they're all tackling a side of Ireland or a side of Irishness that's unique. So it's kind of, yeah, you can throw a rock and you'll hit a good book these days. So there's not one book in particular. Like I read, you know, whatever novel I'm reading usually get something going, you know, and sometimes you just need that little coal on a fire and you can work away yourself then.
Yeah, I think, something that's really struck me from moving to London is how people in London talk about Ireland, specifically about the Irish writing scene, and about how good it is that we have so many magazines that publish Irish writers and that really give them that platform. And you guys were both published in the Stinging Fly, among many other publications. But have you felt like it's unique, the platform that you were given with the Stinging Fly compared with maybe publications in other countries? Or do you guys think that there is something special or particularly nurturing about the environment in Ireland versus elsewhere, or not? It's just I've been told so many times that it is very special.
I think it's special. I think we're very special. I think that, well, one thing I found, like when and I can't speak for JP, but I think it was a similar experience. When I was first published by the Stinging Fly, I found like a community of writers. So I had people to exchange work with, and I exchanged work with JP and Sally and whoever. So like that was what was crucial, I think, to my development, knowing that someone, and that is the one thing I would say also about like not feeling shame around being a writer. It was almost like finding these people to read my work and like take me seriously, even if nobody kind of else did, you know. Nobody else, not even my family. But I just think that was like very important to me, and I think that is like crucial. I think that's why Irish writing is so good, and it was also something I missed a lot during lockdown, because when I was getting so frustrated with my own work, and you know, I would meet another friend for coffee, and you know, half the problems will be solved by talking to someone. You know, so I think that closeness and like bond has really helped Irish writing generally.
Yeah, like there's a reason why there's so many good writers in Ireland. It's because of the literary journals, the community out there. It's amazing, and they do nurture. And I've been lucky enough to read for a couple of magazines their submissions, and every submission is read. And it's not about your name; it's about what's there, you know. And I feel like that's a really important thing. Look, I can't speak for UK presses or USA presses, but what it seems from the outside, from me looking into those two areas, it's a lot of the same people and maybe not as open to anyone. And I feel like the one thing in Ireland we have going for us, we have thriving literary journals where everyone can submit and get read, but it's also, there's no names mean nothing. It's about the work and about getting the work in. And like the Stinging Fly, for example, like they've been amazing for me. You know, they didn't publish my book, but they were everything. They helped me. They put me in contact with other writers. And as Nicole said, you when I get that community of writers, you do start to take yourself seriously, and it allows you to take the work seriously, because it isn't like on your own. It can be such a frustrating business because you know it means so much, but if it's not being read or it's not being heard, or if you can't like bitch about it, it can get overwhelming. So yeah, no, Ireland, it's no secret or no like surprise why there's so many good emerging writers. It's just because those journals and the editors and the readers who work so hard, tirelessly, you know, and we're very, very, very lucky here.
Yeah, I agree. I also think that the booksellers in Ireland, like I know we were talking about bookselling earlier, but like I think that they're very much like, they're very happy to hand sell things that they think are really good, and they really drive literary fiction in a way that again seems slightly different to me from when I was in New York and London and my kind of view of it. But I know that when I was a bookseller, you were given so much space to really champion whatever you thought was good. And I think that really trickled down then to the readers, because people would come in and then they would trust your opinion, and then they would ask you, you know, the next week what you thought was good and stuff. And in that way, there was a more sort of egalitarian way of spreading around what was coming out or what was good. It wasn't all front list or these are the top 10 books that everyone ought to be reading. I think I always notice that helps in the bookshop.
Yeah.
Share it.
And I think it's funny, like Solar Bones came out, you know, Solar Bones is one sentence. A lot of publishers probably thought, oh, readers won't read this. And I actually feel like publishers can be very patronizing to readers, as if they're not intelligent people, that they, you know, that sentences are too confusing or something like that. A good book's a good book is a good book. So yeah, no, and booksellers, like I worked in Dubray and Galway, and everyone there to champion different books. I remember Glorious Heresies by Lisa McInerney in particular was championed in our store, and that's a marvelous book. And people who maybe necessarily wouldn't have read it because it wasn't maybe in the press or didn't get like big interviews, they were encouraged by a bookseller, they read it and they loved it, you know.
It's sort of like beating the algorithm now, like getting like something that wouldn't be recommended to you, you know, like, or wouldn't be like, yeah, like you said, the first book that you see, like you're getting a more kind of personal touch, like a human being recommending something to me, like not a robot or not many robots. like it just seems like such a genuine. It's something I love about writing books, and something I loved about when this was out was getting to go to bookshops and see it there and have someone talk to me about it and who had read it. Someone reading your book, it's really great.
I think it's more organic as well than like a top 20 and just being told that every book in this top 20 ought to be read, and then sort of once you've achieved that, you've understood what the year was in literature, and then you move on. It's like nobody actually reads like that. So the idea then that we're all siphoned into like this way of reading seems a bit bonkers.
Yeah. Or if you liked this X author, you will like these books. Like that's not necessarily true, you know. We all read for different things.
Yeah, exactly. I know the idea that you could just spawn recommendations so readily like that. I don't agree with that at all, I have to say. But I do want to open it up to the floor. If anyone has any questions, right now is the time to speak. So does anyone have any questions they'd like to ask? Okay, while you're all thinking, I am going to ask the cop-out question and ask if you have any advice that you would have given yourselves when you started off writing at the very beginning.
This came to my head recently. I think I read a very good answer, like I wouldn't give any advice to myself, you know, because I made loads of mistakes writing, you know, and I sent off things that were too early, and, you know, I was overly sad about, you know, rejections, you know, I took it to heart, but I kind of think my mother is from Mayo, and honestly, I have these like school of hard knocks just drilled into me, you know. I feel like ever since I was a boy, so it's terrible, like, you know, you should lick your wounds now and again, but yeah, I feel like those mistakes I made were important to where I am now, and kind of maybe my view of writing. I suppose the only thing I could say is just to write and read. Read is always, read more. Yeah. Read more and more. That's always good advice, and it's also just fun, so it's not too taxing.
Agreed.
Yeah, I get quite excited when people ask me for advice. My friends never ask me for advice. Take from that what you want. Mine's the same as JP. I think the only good advice you can give for like writing is like read. Like I really think that's the one. And like we were saying about the bookseller recommendations, don't read the most popular stuff. You know, like you're gonna find, like I was teaching for a little while, and I was always like read around like the writers you like find out who they liked and kind of go back and like, you know, read as just widely as you possibly can, and then I think you'll find. And like my mistake that I made was I was very much tied up with what I thought a serious short story was, which is like, you know, it's about like death, or it's about, and it can be, but like it also like it none of my stories at the beginning sounded like me. And a friend of mine gave me a bit of advice, which was, he was like, I wrote a story set at a petrol station. It was like an older man, and he was like, that's great, why don't you make it a young woman? And it changed everything for me and my own writing. So I was like, yeah, there's no accepted way to write. Like, you can be funny, it can be this side or the other, you know?
Yeah, that was very good advice from both of you.
Yeah, I think that my friends should ask me for advice.
I agree. First and foremost is reading, which I'm always happy to hear. But yeah, if anyone has any questions, do ask.
All right, thanks. Well, this is really good advice. I've been kind of spitballing this ever since I heard you read in UCC JP, and it's about when it comes to actually writing a story. I mean, how do you decide which one to write first?
I'm just going to repeat the question for live streaming, but the question's for JP, which is when you... when you're about to write a story, how do you... Sorry, could you repeat that actually now? I've forgotten.
When it comes to actually writing a story, when it comes to picking which one you might be forming in your head, which one do you write first?
So when you're forming a story in your head, which one do you write first?
Yeah, it's really hard. I go back to that weight of a sentence, and as like fluffy a term that is and very hard to define, that's for me how why I decide to keep going on something. Is a sentence feels right and it rolls into another one. Now I'm in the middle of writing something. I was writing something for a couple of weeks, and then I went to a dead end, and that's like, 2,000-3,000 words. It feels like maybe that's wasted, but it's not. It got me to a point, and maybe the next thing will keep going. There's bits of scraps of that I'll use. So I never think you're wasting an opportunity by following one thing. I do think probably when you begin writing, it's a really good idea just to finish something, get that sense of an ending, and it makes a huge difference. But I don't think I can give you like a correct or right way to know how to go with a story. It kind of more like, as maybe fluffy as it is, like from the gut, you kind of know something's there. But also equally, like, don't be afraid to go with something for 2,000-3,000 words, and if you just feel it's not getting anywhere, go back, start again, see what happens, But for an emerging writer, that's like, to go back on that, that's a good advice, is always to get to an end to something, because there is like a really lovely feeling of finishing something, and it will like help you along the way, I think.
Is it that you like wondering which idea to start with, or?
Well, not my ideas, but for yourself.
Oh.
I mean, how do you actually sort of choose which one to write first?
I don't have many ideas. I'm lucky if I have one idea, roughly a week. I actually don't, and like generally, where I would start from is like, if something's kind of been bothering me, or like niggling at me or something, or location. I always wanted to set a story at a petrol station because I love petrol stations. So that was like my one idea for that.
Turned out very well.
Thank you. It should be sold at petrol stations. My advice is really the same as JP's, which is like, I do finish everything. So even if I kind of don't feel like the idea is working, I will follow it generally to the end. Just to see, because I think you'll only know at the end if it's going to work,
I think Kevin Barry said he's like 4 stories to every 1 good.
Yeah.
So just follow Kevin Barry and you'll be all right.
Yeah, that's a good equation.
No problem.
Yeah, do you have any other questions? Yes.
But a little question, it's about sort of reader responses and whether you read your reviews, whether you think it's useful to read your reviews or counterproductive. I know sometimes there are one-star reviews on Amazon saying that the book was damaged, so your book then gets a
That's the
1 star.
only reason for getting a 1 star. The book was damaged.
So, and on social media as well, do you read up what other people are saying about you?
So yeah, James's question is just, do you read your reviews?
I think Nicole's going to have a very good answer to this. So I'll just go I've been lucky that I haven't got reviewed too much, but it's been very nice. And I probably, well, we're being streamed, so this is an embarrassing thing to admit. I go on like Goodreads and I'm like, oh, this is really lovely. So it is a nice little thing, you know. It's a nice little boost on like a 2 o'clock when this is not coming, that you're like, oh, actually, people have read my book. That's actually an amazing thing. But I wouldn't, I appreciate every reader and stuff like that, but I wouldn't take it too seriously because I think hot air is never a good thing really to one's head. But yeah, and now we go to Nicole.
Sounds like I'm going to say something terrible. I read all my reviews, then I go and find the people that wrote them. No, I don't do that. I do read all my reviews, which I don't like. Actually, I did for this one, and the reason is I write a lot of book reviews. I write a lot of book criticism, so like I'm kind of interested in the book review as a form, and that also allows me to very easily dismiss some of them, to be like, they're not good, you know, they're not my standard. But I also think it's useful. It can be useful to a degree. Like sometimes, like I like maybe for the novel, I don't know if I would. You can get kind of hung up if like you feel you've been like got an unfair review or whatever. And then like the Goodreads one, I actually don't go on Goodreads very much. I save myself that. I just ignore that. But yeah, I think it's an interesting kind of time, isn't it? With like Twitter and Goodreads and things like that. There's this level of like reader engagement that we kind of never had before, and it can be a little bit jarring. And I think if you like got very hung up on it, I think it would be very hard to start something new and things. So I just didn't, you know.
Yeah, I saw something recently and it kind of like, not alarmed me, but it made me kind of go like, Colin Bard has a new collection coming out, very exciting, next year, Homesickness, but someone tweeted it was like retweeted, and someone tweeted that being like, about time. And I was just like, what? You know, like that level of like I don't like that, where it's just like, because, you know, writing such a lonely and dark thing, and then when you actually do produce something, have something like silly like that said, that barrier is a bit strange, that it's like you can get at someone very directly if you want to. I think that's a bit odd in terms of criticism and just like nastiness. But
yeah, I agree. We're actually going to have to finish up. That was an amazing conversation. Thank you both so much. JP and Nicole.